The military situation in Myanmar is changing rapidly. Since launching a resistance offensive known as Operation 1027 late last month, the Three Brotherhood Alliance of ethnic resistance groups has secured large swaths of territory across northern Shan State, close to Myanmar's border with China. Rebel forces have captured an estimated 150 military outposts. They've cut major border crossings and seized control of numerous towns and strategic highway junctions in Shan State. At the same time, allies have launched attacks on junta positions in other parts of the country. As rebel forces make gains, some observers are now arguing that it is a matter of when, not if, Myanmar's military government, formed after the coup of 2021, will collapse. My name is Sebastian Strangio, the Southeast Asia editor at the Diplomat. To explore the implications of Operation 1027 and how China fits into the complex and fluid conflict situation in northeastern Myanmar, I'm joined today by Yun Sun, a senior fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and the director of the center's China program. Yun, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Sebastian.
Now, to start with, give us a sense of where things stand in northeastern Myanmar. How has the political and military situation there changed since the operation was launched on October 27th?
I think most people would focus on the fact that the Brotherhood, the three organizations, AA, TNLA, and most importantly, MNDAA, the Kachin Army, have been able to gain territory in a speed and scale that I think very few had expected. Because these three organizations have been operating in northern Myanmar for a number of years. And in the case of Kachin, it has been in northern Myanmar for a number of decades. So this time for them to launch the attack against the military and also the military-supported local militia, and to be able to successfully claim territory at this scale, I think that has most striking. And it has also raised the question that you talked about earlier, that is this more than just a local resistance? Is this going to signify the watershed event or the turning point in the resistance movement against the military junta?
Now, the most significant thrust of the offensive and the place where it has made the most dramatic gains is in northern Shan State, adjacent to the Chinese border. Now, the Chinese government has reacted harshly in the past to episodes of fighting in the region and has used its leverage with the various armed groups in this region to bring that fighting to a close. How have things played out in terms of Operation 1027, and how would you characterize the Chinese government's response so far?
I think one thing that usually will trigger the Chinese government's harsh response is the inflow of refugees from Myanmar into China. In fact, in 2015, when the Kachin Army launched a similar campaign against the military, it was called Operation 209. It was February 9th. And it did indeed send some refugees into China, but more importantly, it also triggered the Burmese military's bombing of Chinese territory, because the rebels were running north, right? They wanted the rebels, of course, they naturally want to take refuge on the Chinese territory, assuming the junta is not going to go after them. But in the case of 2015, the junta did go after them, and the Burmese artillery and the cannons did explode on Chinese soil and killing a number of Chinese civilians. So that triggered the Chinese harsh response, not only in terms of diplomatic rhetoric, but also a live fire drill along the border to basically force a ceasefire. And it was successful I believe it was the beginning of June of 2015. So this time around, I have not seen a large inflow of refugees into China as a result of the most recent conflict reignited since October 27th. And I also have not seen the Burmese artillery or the Burmese attack against the rebel groups or the ethnic armed groups to cause casualties on Chinese soil, meaning Chinese civilians being killed or being injured in this. So I think most of the reaction we have seen from China, especially from the diplomatic channels, are focused on the fact that instability and escalation of conflict are happening along the Chinese border, and they are calling for ceasefires, they're calling for calmness, and that's also a quite common practice when there is escalation of tension along that border.
Some people have made the claim that the Chinese government has, is actually happy with the resistance offensive insofar as its attempts to crack down on criminal activities or its attempts to push the Kokang authorities to crack down on criminal activities have yielded nothing, and that the operation is they're happy that the operation is going to target these operations. How would you characterize the Chinese government's relationship with the current Kokang leadership, allied with the military junta, and the NDAA, which ran Kokang prior to 2009? And how have criminal fraud operations played into the timing and goals of this operation?
Well, I think we do see that the Kachin Army has claimed that their operation this time, the offensive, is aimed at eradicating the online scam operations in the Kachin on the Kachin territory. And I think there's an interesting convergence between that claim and the Chinese government's desire to eradicate the same online scam operations in Kachin. Actually, the Chinese desire is not just focused on Kachin; it's also the UWSA control area, as well as basically along the border. But I think it's an interesting timing because well, two things happen at the same time does not necessarily suggest causality, right? I think there are people who are drawing the conclusion that, look, the Chinese want these online scam operations gone, and the Kachin is doing it. So therefore, the Kachin must have been supported by China. I think that claim would require empirical evidence, and it also requires a deliberation of what support means in this context. Because support could mean that, well, China not opposing it or China not taking actions to stop them because there is a convergence. But honestly, even without the online scam operations, I still don't think the Chinese will take the action or take the position to oppose the Kachin Army's operation. And the example is the 209 operation in 2015. There was no online scam operations back then, but still the Chinese did not intervene until the escalation of conflict started to affect the safety of the Chinese civilians on the other side of the border. So I think the interesting timing would lead to a natural inference or a natural inclination to say that, well, there must be a correlation between the two. I just have not seen the empirical evidence for it.
Now, the ultimate success of this operation remains unclear, and many, but at the same time, many observers are calling on foreign governments to begin planning for what Myanmar might look like in the event that the military government collapses and something else emerges. Now, China's engagement so far has been, its engagement with the military administration has been based, I think, on the assumption, the very pragmatic assumption, that it will eventually consolidate its hold over the country, and that China should deal with the military in order to advance its core strategic goals in Myanmar. How do you anticipate China responding if the military continues to lose ground?
I think this is an interesting question because if you look at the battlefield development, to this date, if my information is still current, the Kachin Army has not been able to reclaim Laokai, which is the capital city of Kachin. And honestly, Laokai is like the symbol of the control of the Kachin area, right? So I think if the Brotherhood or the three organizations are succeeding so spectacularly, then I guess as a longtime Myanmar watcher, my first question is, why haven't they been able to claim Laokai? And the second question, I think, is, well, these three groups have existed before the military coup, and they have existed since the military coup. And the Kachin Army has been there for a very long time. So in the past, if they did not have the intention to overthrow the military government, because remember before 2011, it was also a military government ruling the country. The question that I'm trying to get at, what is the political aspiration of these groups? Do we believe that their political aspiration will stop at territorial gain? Basically, Kokhan saying that we are the rightful ruler or the rightful owner of the Kokhan area. Therefore, we want to return to our promised land, the lands that my family, the Peng family, had occupied for centuries or for decades, and from generation to generation. Then what incentive do they have, either from PDF or from NUG or from the resistance movement, to challenge the military beyond the territorial gains that they're aiming to have? I think I'm not saying that they will not align with NUG or they will not align with PDF, but I'm just raising the question that what their political aspiration really is and how well can we define them? Again, this might be a fluid question. Their political goal might change, given maybe they see how successful they have been, then they develop other aspirations. But I would also caution that historically, the Kokhan, the Peng family is not famous for democratic decision making or democratic system. So I do think that there is a distinction, a very strong distinction to be made between their territorial claims or their desire for territorial control and the political aspiration that I feel a lot of people are straining or stretching, which is, oh, maybe they want to overthrow the junta. Maybe, but why? This was not their political aspiration in the past. Why would it become their political aspiration now? Especially given the assumed relationship with the assumed support that they have received from China. Do we really believe that China wants to see the military government overthrown, which necessarily, most likely, will necessitate an escalation of conflict and escalation of violence in the country? I just don't see these different claims would coexist in a logically coherent way. Last but not least, in terms of the Chinese government's position on the junta and on the Kokhan offensive, I think that, okay, this is another interesting question. Do we believe that the military junta has gathered all the military forces it could in order to counter the Kokhan offensive? Some may say that, well, the junta run out of money, run out of army that they can send, that they run out of soldiers they can send. But I have also seen other alternative explanations that the military government or Tatmadaw is not inclined to counter the Kokhan at this stage. For what reason, we can debate about that. But I think it is suffice to say that the counteroffensive by the military has been underwhelming. And why? And does that mean this will be sustainable, meaning that the military will not push back? I think it is too early to draw that conclusion. So all in all, I don't see, my personal view, I don't see that this Kokhan offensive has deterministically and critically changed the political landscape in the country just yet. Maybe it will, but so far it has not. It is making territorial gains, but I haven't seen the political aspiration out of Kokhan or the Brotherhood about bigger political agendas such as challenging the junta. So in that sense, I think the Chinese government's estimate or their assessment of the situation is also going to be more on the conservative side, that yes, we've seen this before. This is a conflict that has repeated itself a number of times in 2009, in 2015, and now again. And it's primarily a struggle by the Kachin Army, especially the Peng family, to reclaim their territory in Kokhan region. So far, it is not yet more than that.
Well, plenty of food for thought as we watch developments unfold in the coming weeks and months. Yun, thank you for your time. And yeah, I appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yes, we will keep observing the situation.